Perfect. Okay, thank you, Doug, and thank you, Sequoia. Welcome, everyone. This is the June Interagency Equity Advisory Committee, and I would like to call the meeting to order at 1:07 p.m. And I'll turn it over to Doug to do roll call.
Thank you. We'll start off by letting folks know that there is Spanish translation available on this meeting, and I will let our interpreters give some instructions for that, and then we'll start up the interpretation channel.
Hola y bienvenidos. Si desea escuchar el programa interpretado al español, favor de oprimir el icono de globo que dentro de poco aparecerá en la parte inferior de su dispositivo. Oprima español. Si desea escuchar el programa solo en español, favor de oprimir mute original audio o silenciar audio original. Gracias. The interpreters are ready for interpretation to be enabled. Thank you.
We'll give that just a sec to kick in. All right, we'll move on to roll call.
Muy bien, vamos a continuar con anunciar la presencia. I don't think interpretation.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Brandy, we're still hearing the interpretation.
Working on it.
Dentro de poco se encenderá la función para poder tener la interpretación.
And
Interpretation available.
okay, they should be on the Spanish interpretation channel now. Let me know if there's any issues.
Thank you. Okay, roll call. Martha Armis Kelly,
Present. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Alexandria Contreras,
Aye.
Michael Despain,
Present.
thank you. Ana Gonzalez, Herb Hastings, Peggy Martinez,
Present.
Amber Novi,
Present.
Naila Pope Harden,
Present.
Axel Santana,
Present.
Connie Stewart,
Present.
Randy Torres Van Vleck,
Present.
Stella Ursura, Cheryl Villegas Walker, William Walker, Christine Williams. We have a quorum. I'll proceed with a few instructions on the webinar. Welcome to the Interagency Transportation Equity Advisory Committee meeting. The committee's focus will be on elevating diverse and historically marginalized voices and will advise the California Transportation Commission, California State Transportation Agency, and the Department of Transportation on how to achieve meaningful outcomes in transportation equity, environmental justice, and equitable economic opportunities, especially as related to transportation planning and programming. The meeting agenda is located on the Commission's website at www.catc.ca.gov. Spanish language and American Sign Language translations are being provided for this meeting. You can access these services through the Interpretation tab at the bottom of your screen. You will need to select which translation service you need. Please use the Q&A tab if you have questions about this. You should see the American Sign Language translators on your screen. Live closed captioning is also available. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose from. Any document created for this committee can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov and we will have them returned to you as quickly as possible. For our presenters, if you're on the agenda to make a presentation, please do your best to be succinct. Please remember to speak at a steady pace to allow our translating services adequate time for accurate translations. Please turn on your camera during your presentation if you have one. For our members of the public, we welcome comments from the public as part of each item at this meeting. You should see the webinar control panel, likely located on the bottom of your screen. There you will find the raise hand feature and the Q&A tabs. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as soon as we reach the item to give the system time to acknowledge you. Committee staff will let you know when it's your turn to make your comment. Alternately, you may use a Q&A tab to submit your comment. Committee staff will read the comment on your behalf. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link. These should not be shared with other participants, as this can create confusion for staff when making comments. Please do your best to be concise. Please remember to speak at a steady pace to allow our translating services adequate time for accurate translations. Please make sure your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. We ask that you make your point in 3 minutes or less. If for some reason we have many speakers on a single topic, we reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute as needed. Thank you for joining us today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doug. Peggy, I see you have your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, I do. I am making the request that at least for the first, maybe half hour or so, or if it's your first time to speak, so any of the members that are going to address us are, if you're not on the agenda and you're going to make a point, could you please just say your name so that I know who is speaking? That would be extremely helpful. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Peggy. We can definitely do that. Appreciate it. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carolyn Abrams, and I'm the Acting Race and Equity Program Manager for the Caltrans Director's Office of Equity, Sustainability, and Tribal Affairs. I want to acknowledge that this is our first committee-only meeting, and I also think most of you were able to probably tune in for our last convening, which happened in person on March 21st, and that was our inaugural meeting for this committee, which was a combination of our committee members and our executives. So as we move forward through today's meeting, I just want to appreciate everyone that has made this possible. And I know we're looking forward to holding additional EAC-only meetings throughout the year, which will really allow us to advance the formation of the committee's policy recommendations to our agencies. We are very grateful for all of the opportunities for collaboration that the EAC members have been able to partake in with our agency initiatives. And we look forward to hearing about those experiences later during the interagency updates item on the agenda. And of course, thank you to all of our interagency staff and partners who helped put together today's meeting. I did want to acknowledge and introduce a few of our key staff who are joining us today or who have been closely involved in the work around the EAC. So from the California State Transportation Agency, we have Undersecretary Mark Tolofson, we have Darwin Musavi, who's the Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Housing Coordination. We have Jaden Saldana, who's an Executive Fellow with the agency. And then from our California Transportation Commission, we have Tanisha Taylor, who is serving in a new role as Interim Executive Director. We have Laura Pennybaker, who is the Deputy Director of Planning. We also have Sequoia Erasmus, who is the Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement. And we have Cherry Zamora, who is the Assistant Deputy Director from the planning team at the California Transportation Commission. And in addition to myself from Caltrans, we also have Alexis Lance, who's the Assistant Deputy Director for Climate Justice. I'd also like the EAC members to be able to introduce themselves as well. I know we just did roll, but I'm going to read through, and when I say your name, feel free to unmute yourself, and I'd like you to say your name, the region that you represent, and your subject matter expertise. And we'll try to keep it brief so that we can get into the bulk of our agenda here. But I'll go in order. And again, as I call your name, feel free to unmute yourself and give a brief introduction. So I will start with Martha.
Okay, good morning. Good afternoon. Martha Armis Kelly, Catholic Charities Environmental Justice Program, and I represent the Central California Valley. I reside in Merced. My areas of expertise would be in environmental justice, especially related to housing, equity, and transportation. I am a fellow with UC Berkeley in the transportation program with leaders and residents. And there's much more, but we have very short time. So thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Alex, I'll have you go next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Contreras. My pronouns are they, them. My expertise is in the intersection of housing and transit. I am currently in Oakland, even though I do bounce between LA and Oakland. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alex. Michael? And I believe Michael was in transit. So Michael, if you're unable to unmute yourself right now, not a problem. I'll check back in with you at the end. Is Anna here?
I'm on. I can get on now. I finally got the button.
Perfect. Go ahead, Michael.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Despain, Buena Vista Rancheria, Chief Operations Officer, Natural Resource Director, and Fire Chief for the tribe, representing Sacramento and Amador County as the individual tribe, and then all tribal governments within the state of California.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. I don't believe Anna is on. Peggy.
Hi, everyone. Peggy Martinez here. I live in Arcata, California, which is up on the north coast of the state. I am an accessibility consultant. I specialize in public rights of way, the built environment, transit accessibility, how it intersects with housing and employment, and other, important life activities. And I focus on accessibility for all people, people with all disabilities. So including folks who are blind or low vision, wheelchair users, and more. And I am with my company. It's called Creative Inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Amber?
Hi, Amber Novi from the LIUNA. That's a laborers union. I'm based in Sacramento, California. I reside in Rockland, California, and I bring the construction industry perspective and minorities in the construction industry to the table.
Thank you, Amber. Naila?
Hello, Naila Pope Harden, Executive Director of Climate Plan. I reside in Sacramento, but Climate Plan has a statewide scope, and my area expertise here would be climate and equity.
Great, thank you, Naila. Axel?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Axel Santana, he, him, his pronouns, associate at PolicyLink, which is a national equity organization. I'm based out of Northern Orange County and lead some of our statewide work around transportation, climate, and equity.
Thank you, Axel. Connie?
Hi, I'm Connie Stewart. I also live in Arcata, California on the North Coast. I'm the former mayor of the city of Arcata and have been in government, state and local government for most of my career. I am very interested in equity and infrastructure, especially broadband infrastructure.
Thank you, Connie. Randy?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Randy Torres Van Vleck. Pronouns are he, him, or they, them. And I grew up in the southwest part of Chula Vista in San Diego County, near the international border between US and Mexico. And I live in City Heights. And I work for the City Heights Community Development Corporation. I'm the director of policy and planning there. And I'm very interested in community engagement, regional planning, making planning accessible and participatory, community development, and transportation equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. William? I believe I saw William hop on. Okay, in the meantime, I see we have two hands. Commissioner Liu, I believe your hand was up first, and then Martha, you were second.
Thank you. Excuse me. I just wanted to let everyone know I was here in attendance, listening and paying attention to what this Equity Advisory Committee is doing. just sitting here and listening to all of the people participating and where they come from and what they do, it's really incredibly just impressive. And I am so thankful that you're doing this, and very appreciative, and look forward to whatever you guys are deciding in terms of your governance structure today. And can't wait till you get your, to the tougher issues. I hope of transportation equity. And just again, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you to the staff from all of the different entities who are engaged in making this happen. And I just wanted to express my appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Liu. We're happy to have you. Martha?
Hi, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I reside on Yokuts and Miwok territory, giving land recognition and honor to our ancestors that have made this provision.
Thank you, Martha. And William, if you've been switched over to a panelist, feel free to unmute yourself, and we'd love for you to be able to introduce your name. There we go. Perfect.
I'm here. I'm outside the courthouse. There's a lot going on, so apologize. I'm William. I don't even know if you can see me, but speaking of land acknowledgement, I'm on Ohlone land in the Bay Area. Born and raised in San Francisco, which is where I live. And I am a transportation planner, but also in graduate school. So my expertise is around understanding how to make transit more equitable and affordable and accessible for communities. And I'm happy to be here, and really happy to be working with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, William. And thank you for all of the committee members for being here today. I think we have a really great meeting ahead of us, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. So that concludes our welcome and our introductions. At this point, I'll hand it over to Sequoia for the executive meeting recap, which will be tab 3.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks to our EAC members, commissioners, executives, agency staff, as well as members of the public who are able to join us today for this meeting. So tab 3 is a recap of our Executive Equity Advisory Committee meeting that we held on March 21st, 2023 in Los Angeles, California, and on Zoom. That was our first convening of our Equity Advisory Committee, and we really appreciate all of the EAC members, commissioners, and executives who were able to join us, and to everyone for continuing to support this work. Highlights from the March meeting included hearing from EAC members about your personal connections to transportation advocacy in communities, as well as we also heard from transportation equity expert Tamika Butler, who helped set the stage for the importance of the work of the committee, challenging the group to, quote, realize that this work is not for certain groups of people who fit certain demographics or who check certain boxes or who have certain words in their job title, but this work is for all of us, Tamika said. Members also reviewed the results from a survey offered in January 2023 that aims to guide the work of the committee for the next year, emphasizing a need to gain a better understanding of how transportation funding, policy, and programs work in the state of California, and asking our interagency teams to clearly identify future opportunities to collaborate with our agencies. And we hope that some of what we're bringing to you today reflects what we heard and some of those changes that we're aiming to make. With that, that concludes my recap. Are there any public comment or questions?
Sequoia, I do not see any public comment at this time.
Great. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Go ahead, Randy.
Thanks, Sequoia. I just wanted to thank you and the staff who organized that in-person event. It was a fantastic opportunity to get to know fellow EAC colleagues and also leadership at the CTC, Calston, and Caltrans. So fantastic job, and really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
Thanks, Randy. And if any other members have comments, please feel free to just go ahead. I can't see everyone's box, so please just speak up. All right, hearing none, really appreciate taking some time out for that recap, and I will turn it to Terry for tab 4. Thank you.
Committee members, tab number 4 of the agenda is the approval for the minutes of the March 21st, 2023 Interagency Equity Advisory Committee meeting. Staff recommends your approval. Do any committee members have questions at this point? And do we have any public comment?
Jerry, I do not see any public comment at this time. But check in with the Spanish interpreter to see if we have any public comment from there. All right, hearing none. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will turn it over to Commission Clerk Doug Remedios to facilitate roll call vote.
Thank you, Cherry. Before we can take a vote, we'll need a motion and a second.
This is Mike Despain. I motion to accept.
Connie Stewart, I'll second.
Second, Amber Novi.
I'm sorry, who made that first motion? I couldn't hear clearly.
Mike Despain.
Thank you, Michael. And we will start with a roll call. And because we are fully remote, we have to do a roll call for every vote. Martha Armas Kelly.
Aye.
Alexandria Contreras.
Present.
Michael Despain.
Aye.
Ana Gonzalez. Herb Hastings. Peggy Martinez.
Aye.
Amber Novi.
Aye.
Naila Pope Harden.
Aye.
Axel Santana.
Aye.
Connie Stewart.
Aye.
Randy Torres Van Vleck.
Aye.
Stella Ursura. Cheryl Villegas Walker. William Walker.
Aye.
Christine Williams. The motion is approved.
Thank you, Doug. So that takes us to tab 5, which is focused on governance structures. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Veronica Eady, who serves as the Bay Area Air Quality Management District Executive Officer of Equity and Community Programs. Ms. Eady joins us today as a subject matter expert and practitioner in the area of convening advisory groups focused on environmental justice and equity. So she will be able to provide us with a high-level introduction to governance structure that will really help inform our discussion for this committee. The focus of her presentation today will be on the importance of having a governance structure that makes sense for the Equity Advisory Committee. With that, I will turn it over to Veronica.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I have a few slides. Hello, everybody. And I want to thank you for having me today and give me the opportunity to help you sort of frame the subject as the committee moves forward and develops their own governance structures and documents. So as Carolyn said, and as the slide says, I'm the Deputy Executive Officer of Equity and Community Programs at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. We're one of 35 air districts across the state who regulates stationary sources. So that's, major facilities, factories, refineries, all sorts of sources, down to small sources that you might find in your communities, like dry cleaners and auto body shops. So we're one of 35, and environmental justice and equity is a big part of the work that we do. Just to give you a little bit of information about my position, and then I'll talk a little bit about my background. I've been at the Air District for about 3 years, and before that, I was at the California Air Resources Board in a similar position, overseeing environmental justice work and really constructing for the first time an environmental justice program at CARB. As part of my work here at the Air District, I oversee all of our environmental justice work and community engagement work, as well as our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I also oversee our incentive grant making program, which is a number of programs where we move over or hundreds of millions of dollars annually to incentivize polluting sources to use newer technologies that are less polluting. A lot of that money is pass-through money that we get through CARB, we get from the Department of Motor Vehicles, et cetera. And it's been really exciting to take on that work so that the majority of the funding is going into disadvantaged communities. I also temporarily oversee our compliance and enforcement division, as well as our permitting division. So I have a lot of work on my plate, and it's a really wonderful opportunity to advance equity and environmental justice in our work. My work that is most relevant to the Equity Advisory Committee is our Community Advisory Council that we have here at the Air District. The Community Advisory Council, or the CAC, has been in existence for a little over a year now. They started meeting, I think, in March of 2022. And so over the course of the last year, they've been doing a lot of work to pull together their governance structure. It's actually been quite a long journey for our CAC, in part because when they were appointed by the board hadn't really laid out a resolution or really any particular guardrails for the CAC. So they've been doing a lot of work over the course of the last year, inventing themselves, really. They've been prioritizing what they want to work on. They've been pulling together their governance document. They've been hearing from us. They've been doing a lot of training. And we're almost to the finish line with our governance document. And in a minute, I'll go through some of the things that they've highlighted and that are in the governance document that'll go to the board soon. I do want to talk just very briefly about my history. I've been doing environmental justice work since the mid-1990s. I came into doing environmental justice work in government in the early 2000s when I lived in Boston, Massachusetts, and I helped the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, among other things, develop an environmental justice policy. I pulled together an advisory group, which was called the Massachusetts Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. It disbanded after the EJ policy was signed in the early 2000s, but they've recently come back together again under an undersecretary there who comes from the environmental justice community, as I did many, many years ago. So I pulled that together from whole cloth, and I think that's a lot of the work that's going on here at the CTC and the work on your plate. But I also had the honor of serving on the US EPA's Federal Advisory Committee, the NEJAC, also known as the National Advisory Committee on Environmental Justice. And I chaired that committee for 2 years, which is the term of the chairs of that committee. And I had the pleasure and the honor of working with CARB's Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. So I had all of that under my belt before coming to the Air District. And it's been a really amazing journey to work with our CAC here. On the NEJAC, the Federal Advisory Committee, they do have a number of standing committees. Before I chaired the NEJAC, I was the chair of the Waste and Facility Siting Subcommittee. They have a subcommittee on Indigenous issues. They have subcommittees on water, all of the various different things that you might see at Cal EPA, for example. They had standing committees at the NEJAC. CARB's EJAC, on the other hand, as far as I know, they don't have any committees. I could be wrong now. The EJAC was created, as you may know, under AB 32, which is the groundbreaking climate change law that California passed in 2006, and many states, including Massachusetts, mimicked in some cases, as in the case of Massachusetts, parts of AB 32 it adopted verbatim. The EJAC was part of AB 32. It was brought together to guide the community process of putting together climate programs, and in particular CARB's scoping plan. In the last year, however, CARB's board decided that the EJAC would not just come together for the purpose of doing the scoping plans, which are developed every 5 years, but would be a perennial advisory group that would advise CARB on a whole host of issues and throughout, perpetually throughout, and not taking breaks between scoping plans. So they've just moved into that. They may have committees now, I'm not sure, but I did want to mention the committee process, which I will come to in a minute, but let's move to the next slide and just talk a little bit about the legal parameters. So I gather that the Equity Advisory Committee is guided by Bagley-Keene, which is the statewide open meetings law. That's the same law that governs CARB's EJAC. With respect to air districts and local and regional government, we are governed by the Brown Act. That's what governs our CAC. But they're very similar, I think, in many respects. I won't dig into Bagley-Keene because I'm not an expert on Bagley-Keene, but I will say that some of the things that the Brown Act and Bagley-Keene deal with are things like quorum, open meetings. I heard you have public comment just now. That's something that is included in the Brown Act, as I'm sure it is by Bagley-Keene. You are required by law to have public comment, although under the Brown Act, the governing body, our CAC, can determine how long those public comments are. Our board decided that their public comment would be, I think, 2 minutes. So our CAC can determine how long our public comments are, and I think that our public comments on the CAC are 3 minutes. And in some cases, the Bagley-Keene or Brown Act can determine how much compensation are provided to members of public bodies like the EAC and the EJAC, as well as the CAC. Our board actually determined what our CAC would receive. So there are some variations in the law. The other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of a legal requirement is the ethics piece. And so as a public employee, I am governed by the Fair Public Practices, Political Practices Commission. My activities and potential conflicts of interest are governed by the FPPC. And I am required annually to fill out a Form 700. The same is true for our CAC, as I am sure it is for you. So there are the basic legal parameters and legal requirements under the Bagley-Keene Act and under the Brown Act. And then within those limitations, there are things that you can do as an EAC, and certainly things that our CAC has put in place. And I'll talk about that a bit more. I'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to stay here for a little bit. So I'm going to use just for a frame of reference and probably the most relevant the CAC that we have here at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. One thing that I do want to say is that as you all were introducing yourselves, I heard some of you do land acknowledgements. I'm sitting here in San Francisco, and I live in Oakland, in Ohlone territory. Land acknowledgements were something that our CAC decided was important to them. And so they did debate quite a while how they wanted to do their land acknowledgements. And they actually decided that they didn't want to do the Pledge of Allegiance and instead would do a land acknowledgement. They developed a land acknowledgement that is specific to them. They debated whether or not they wanted to say the land acknowledgement at the beginning of each meeting in lieu of the Pledge of Allegiance. And what they decided to do was, rather than their land acknowledgement is actually relatively long, so they decided that they would include it on all of their agendas, and they actually also included the land acknowledgement in their agenda, in their charter. And I would have shared the charter with you, and I am happy to do so in the future. Our CAC, as I mentioned, basically functions as a committee of the board. And as such, I shouldn't say they function as a committee of the board. Technically, they are a committee of the board under the Brown Act. And so therefore, every decision that they make has to be adopted by the board. So the CAC has adopted a charter, and they've recommended that our board adopt it. So our route of progress from the CAC is that it goes to the board standing committee on community equity, health, and justice. So the charter will go to that committee this month, and then the board ultimately will take it up in July. So once it is formal, actually it's going to be posted with our board package, so I can share it with you after June 6th if you like, or I can wait until July and when the board hopefully has formally adopted it. Happy to do that. So as I said, they developed a charter, and there are a number of pieces in the charter. I have some highlights here. I'll spend a little bit of time on each of these things and then wrap up. And if you all have any questions, I can be with you here until 2 o'clock. I actually have to go to another meeting that just popped up on my calendar on Friday. So I apologize for not being here for the entire meeting this afternoon. So leadership. So our charter for the CAC lays out the leadership. Our CAC is governed by, at the moment, 3 co-chairs who serve in terms of, I believe, 2 years. And in the charter lays out that the CAC can have up to 3 co-chairs, but it is up to the CAC. So right now we do have 3 co-chairs who are just entering the 2nd year of their 3-year term. In the charter lays out what their responsibilities are. They have quite a few responsibilities, and actually in terms of compensation, they do get a little bit more compensation than the rest of the CAC, in part because they do put in a lot more work. The CAC itself meets bi-monthly, and on the months that the CAC is not meeting, they come to our board's Community Equity, Health and Justice Committee, and they have a presentation and a dialogue. So I understand that the EAC had meetings with executive leadership of the agencies that you work with. And so at the moment, we do not have a board liaison, which is typical for our board. We're working out the details of what that liaison might look like if the board and the CAC decide to have a liaison. But in the meantime, every other month they come to our board, the co-chairs come to our board and do a presentation on what was discussed at the CAC. So not just sharing the minutes, but also actually having a presentation and an opportunity for dialogue with the board on those topics. The leadership of the CAC also meets with staff. They meet every week with staff. They pull together agenda items, but during those weekly meetings, they also hear from staff from within the agency. They hear about programs that they might want to have presented at future CAC meetings. So there's a lot of interaction between the co-chairs and staff. There is a lot of interaction and periodic meetings between the co-chairs and the officers of the board. And there are regular meetings between the co-chairs and the executive officer of the Air District. I mentioned the terms of office of the leadership are 2 years. Our CAC also talks about, or charter also talks about the terms of office of the CAC itself. And as I said, and I'm trying to remember, I have the charter up in front of me. I'm trying to remember what the actual terms are. I think they might be 3 years for the CAC members themselves. But as I said, the charter does have to be adopted by the board, and there has been quite a bit of back and forth. And so there was an earlier version of it that the CAC passed. The board had some changes that they wanted to see, not minor changes, but not major changes, minor changes. But the board suggested changes. There were meetings and dialogue between the CAC leadership and the board, and then the CAC ended up having to re-adopt the updated version. So I'll move on to subcommittees. So there are a number of committees of the CAC. We, at this moment, don't have any standing committees. The standing committees would be subject to the Brown Act and could go on in perpetuity. As I said, we don't have any right now. But to give you an example, our board has a number of standing committees. They have As I said, the Community Equity, Health and Justice Committee, which actually started out as an ad hoc committee, and I'll talk about ad hocs in a minute. And the board decided to make it permanent, so it became a permanent committee after a year. We've got a legislative committee that is a standing committee of the board. The board has a finance and administration committee. They have committees like mobile source committees and things like that that are standing committees. The CAC doesn't have any issues like that are issues that they want to address on a regular ongoing basis. Frankly, I could see perhaps in the future a standing committee, say, for example, on enforcement. Enforcement is an issue that CAC members have shown a lot of interest in. And so that's an example of something that I could see as being a standing committee, but is not a standing committee at this point. Right now we have 4 ad hoc committees. We have a work plan ad hoc committee, which, as you can imagine, is working on the work plan, the annual work plan for the CAC. And I should say that ad hoc committees are of limited duration and very specific in the scope of what they're working on. In the charter, we define what an ad hoc committee is. Some of the ad hoc committees are mentioned in the charter. Things like the work plan is a committee that will sunset, but it will come back. So it is specifically mentioned in the charter, as is the governance committee. We also have other limitations on ad hocs. For example, in the charter, it limits how many ad hocs members can be on. So we do have members on some of our ad hoc committees that are interested in other ad hoc committees that are coming along. And we've actually delayed some of those ad hoc committees, delayed their formation and work, because we do know that we have some members that are on other ad hocs that want to be involved. The other important thing is that for an ad hoc committee, it has to be less than a quorum. Standing committees generally are not subject to that, but ad hocs do have to be less than a quorum. And that's another reason why there are certain limitations. We have a governance ad hoc. As I said, we have an ad hoc on our EJ policy, and that ad hoc is assisting the staff as we develop an environmental justice policy and going back and forth. And we actually have a consultant that is also working with us on that. And then we have an ad hoc on participatory budgeting. And one of the things that the board did in creating the CAC is asking it to develop a grant program, which we call the Community Benefits Fund. And so the ad hoc committee is actually will be working on the Community Benefits Fund, but right now they're doing training and research on participatory budgeting, because they would like to have a system like that they're going to be using as they stand up the grant making program, the Community Benefits Fund. So moving on to processes, I talked a little bit about agenda setting. The charter or governance document can also talk about decision-making, discussion of decisions. Of course, some of these things, just like public comment, are governed by the law and the Brown Act, but within those legal requirements, the charter goes into a bit more detail on decision-making, public comment, things of that sort. With respect to attendance, They talk about, our charter talks about absenteeism and the consequences of absenteeism, including, how many meetings you can miss before you risk being replaced in those meetings. So those are things that you can definitely discuss. We talk about voting. They are also using Robert's Rules of Order, and I believe that you're using Robert's rules. You can certainly incorporate those sorts of things into the governance document, and our CAC has certainly done some of that, especially regarding attendance and absenteeism. Moving right along, because I know I'm running out of time, civility is a big deal. And our CAC thought that it recognized it as a big deal and wanted members to treat each other with respect, and for example, people to not necessarily dominate discussions, making room for everybody to speak. And so our charter talks about civility as well as civility training. And we have been through civility training as a CAC. Staff generally, when the CAC goes through any sort of training, staff trains with them. And we talk about conflict resolution and what do you do when there is incivility and there is a conflict of interest that is needs to be or a conflict between CAC members that needs to be resolved. Generally speaking, with respect to conflict resolution, our charter talks about high-level things in terms of process. It talks about our chief executive, our executive officer, who, if a conflict can't be resolved in a meeting, is part of that conflict resolution process. It gets appealed to the executive officer, and then from the executive officer, if it still cannot be resolved, moves on to mediation. So those are the kinds of things that we've included or that the CAC has included in our charter. Coming back to compensation for a second, I do want to say that our CAC has a separate compensation policy, and that compensation policy incorporates some of what our board has set out as compensation. And so it is something that adds detail basically to any legal parameters or board action on compensation. So you can certainly either through a separate policy or in your governance document, talk more about compensation and what the process is for being compensated. And with that, the last slide just has my contact information. So I want to thank you again for the opportunity to present here today. And as I said, I am happy to follow up and send a copy of our charter if you're interested in seeing that as you dig into your process of developing your charter. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Veronica. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to speak with us and for offering all of these resources as a follow-up. Again, everyone, this is Veronica Eady, the Deputy Executive Officer of Equity and Community Programs with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. I think we have just a minute if anybody has any clarifying questions, but I will note that we're following Veronica's presentation with another presentation around governance structures, and then we'll be setting aside time for discussion with the committee at that point. So if there are no clarifying questions, we can always save the discussion for a little bit later. And in the meantime, I just want to see if there's any public comment on this item.
Thank you, Carolyn. I do not see anyone from the public looking to comment on this item at this time. I'd like to check in with the Spanish interpreter to see if we've received any comments from that line as well. No comment from there as well. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, with that, I think we will move to tab 6. So tab 6 is focused on EAC governance structures, rules and procedures, and ex officio membership. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Jaden Saldana. Jaden is an executive fellow with the California State Transportation Agency, and he has a presentation prepared for us today focused on a lot of these different options that the committee can consider for their own governance structure. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jaden.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn, and a special thanks to Veronica for sharing her insights from the Bay Area AQMD, and thanks for all the for all of you taking the time out of your day to attend this meeting and participate in this discussion. Before the EAC begins the process of forming a charter, I'm just going to provide a quick overview of some of the ways that similar committees, similar advisory committees have structured themselves and some of the key elements that they include in their charter. And keep in mind that this is just to present some options to inform the members as they go into this process. With the exception of ex officio membership, there's no staff recommendation for any of these qualities. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So just a quick roadmap of the presentation. I'll start by reviewing 3 common governance structures before giving an overview of some of the rules and procedures that underlie the ways that other advisory committees run. We'll cover what a quorum is and why it's important. We'll discuss the concept of ex officio members and review a staff recommendation and a potential action item for this meeting. And we'll also talk about accountability mechanisms that the EAC could adopt to make sure that its voice is being considered by decision makers in state government, as well as being able to promote internal accountability before we wrap up and discuss what next steps look like in terms of forming and adopting a charter. And next slide, please. So first, it might be helpful to define what a governance structure is in the first place. Governance structures establish and describe the relationship that members of the leadership team, those are your chairs and your co-chairs, have with one another, the committee membership at large, and staff that oversee the committee. The main difference between the structures that I'm going to present to you today is really the number of chairs and co-chairs that each has. But this can have a practical impact on how the committee functions, because chairs and co-chairs within a leadership team tend to carry out important responsibilities that are prescribed by the charters. This may include working with staff to form agendas, acting as a liaison between committee staff and the committee members, and overseeing work groups that the committee establishes. So let's go ahead and review our first governing structure. And if you would go to the next slide, that'd be awesome. The first governance structure we'll discuss, we'll call the leadership team. And as the org chart on the right shows, this features multiple co-chairs that have equal authority. And it's really important to remember that in this structure, no member of the leadership team outranks another. This might not be the most common governance structure in committees that were surveyed for this presentation, but it can have some strengths. Having multiple co-chairs instead of just one chair can increase the leadership team's capacity to manage its duties. And like Veronica mentioned, a greater number of chairs could provide more opportunities to facilitate communication between staff and committee members. And also having multiple individuals on the leadership team could provide increased opportunities to ensure that the committee's diversity is represented in its leadership team. Even with these potential strengths in mind, it's important to note that the structure has might require a few things to succeed, given that the chairs are co-equal. This includes making sure that roles and responsibilities are really well defined to avoid overlap, and to make sure that chairs are consistently communicating with one another to avoid confusion and inconsistency. If necessary, this may also require the committee to establish a conflict resolution process that manages any disagreement that the chairs may have with each other. Next slide. We'll move on now to the minimalist structure. And as you can see from the chart on the right, this structure features less members of the leadership team. It's just 2 members and only 1 chair. And really that 1 chair handles all the leadership responsibilities that are prescribed to it in the charter. There is a vice chair, but in this structure, it's usually the case that the vice chair is only responsible for serving as the chair in their absence. They really don't have much of a leadership role aside from that. Compared to the last model, the minimalist structure allows members to clearly define and identify a point of leadership when it comes to the chair's duties. So there's never a question as to who's responsible for helping with meeting agendas or communicating with staff. It's the chair, and usually that's that. This simple leadership structure often leads to a clearer articulation of committee priorities and stances, but having only 1 chair could result in reduced capacity that makes it hard for that one individual to handle leadership duties all by themselves. And having just 1 chair and a vice chair may leave fewer opportunities for the EAC's diversity to be represented on the leadership team. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're deliberating which structure may be right to include in the charter. Next slide. And our last model that we'll go over, we'll call the expanded structure, because compared to the other models that we just went over, it features more individuals on the leadership team. And what this model really tries to do is strike a balance between having a clear point of leadership while still allowing for greater capacity and more opportunities for representation on the leadership team. And it does this by having only 1 chair that technically, when it comes to leadership duties, outranks the vice chairs. There's usually 3 to 5 vice chairs in this model. And unlike the previous structure, the vice chairs in this expanded structure generally do take on more substantial leadership roles. They're not just there to fill in for the chair if the chair is absent. And in turn, the chair is responsible for delegating leadership duties in a way that makes sense, in a way that's effective, while still remaining a point of authority that can provide direction and resolve disputes when needed. Potentially, this structure could provide a higher level of capacity to the point where it could do things like establish standing committees that are overseen by the vice chairs. And it could also provide increased opportunities for representing the diversity of the committee at large in the leadership team. But it's really important to note that this model requires sustained interest from several members of the committee. And in other words, if you don't have 4 to 6 members who are interested in consistently meeting after meeting, serving and taking up leadership roles and making that time commitment, this really isn't a feasible structure to work with. And so those are the 3 structures that are really common in different committees that are like the EAC. And with that, we'll move forward from discussing governance structures to rules and procedures. So next slide. We'll start by looking at voting majorities. And one of the questions that the charter is meant to answer is, what constitutes a voting majority that can approve a given action? The committee has to decide essentially what the threshold is, how many votes are needed to do things like elect members or approve policy recommendations or amend the charter. Establishing this threshold requires determining a few things. One is whether or not an action requires the approval of the entire membership or only those who are present at a meeting. Another thing to consider is the percentage of votes needed to adopt an action. For example, whether or not approving an action requires only a simple majority of members or whether it requires an even greater portion of votes, like a 2/3 supermajority. In answering these questions, members should keep in mind that it's not uncommon for committees to actually adopt different voting thresholds for different types of actions. And so a lot of charters, for example, require a supermajority of all members who are present, regardless of who's in attendance, to elect a member, while only a simple majority of those who are actually at a meeting are required to adopt recommendations. And so different definitions of majorities for different circumstances, that's a completely normal thing to include in a charter. Next slide. Now, while we're on the topic of discussing voting majorities, it's worth noting that even though an action may be able to pass with no more than the minimum number of votes needed under the charter, a lot of advisory committees strive to abide by a norm that's known as consensus decision-making. The idea here is that a committee should strive to achieve unanimous agreement or a strong consensus while taking actions, even if this means compromising to get more than the majority of votes necessary to approve an action. Committing to this practice can help further two goals. The first is that it ensures each individual voice is considered in the decision-making process, since all members are engaged with when trying to build a consensus. But beyond this, consensus decision-making can be valuable because it articulates, as the CARB's EJAC charter mentions, the clearest and strongest power of the group. In other words, committee decisions seem to have greater authority when they're made with a broad consensus rather than a cut and dry majority, because it reflects the committee's thoughtfulness, intentionality, and sense of urgency. If members find this to be valuable, find consensus decision-making to be a valuable principle, the EAC may adopt a provision in the charter articulating the group's commitment to this concept. Now, in any committee, a poorly moderated meeting can become really unproductive. And to prevent this, staff is considering using a professional facilitator. They're still weighing out whether or not this is a feasible option to employ, but if that's the route that they choose to go to, it could really simplify the way that meetings are conducted and the use of Robert's Rules of Order. For those of you who might not know, just to briefly touch on it, Robert's Rules of Order is a set of procedural practices that provide an organized way to move through meeting agendas, adopt action items, and facilitate conversations. It can be complicated, even for people who regularly use it, but chances are that everyone on this committee has seen Robert's Rules in action or used it at some point. In fact, we used it earlier today to raise motions and approve the meeting minutes. And so we all have some familiarity here with that process. A training is not going to be given on Robert's Rules at this time, but it may in the future, depending on whether or not there are enough members of the EAC who are interested in doing something like that. And then it's important, and Veronica mentioned the Bagley-Keene Act, but it's worth touching on again because it's so vital to acknowledge. The Bagley-Keene Act requires 10 days of public notice prior to any instance where a quorum of members meet. In other words, if a quorum of members meets without giving a 10-day public notice, this is a violation of the law. And so members should really be particularly careful to not violate this requirement and should notify interagency staff far before any instance where they think that a quorum of members of the EAC may be present. Let's go to the next slide. And speaking of quorum, some of you may be wondering what exactly a quorum is. Well, the Bagley-Keene Act defines a quorum as the minimum number of members needed to conduct an official proceeding. And so to conduct business, the law requires a quorum of committee members like the EAC to physically meet in person before conducting business. Now, obviously today we're not in person. That's because during the state of emergency declared in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the in-person requirement was temporarily suspended. But this exception is ending at the end of this month on June 30th. And so the EAC will need to begin meeting in person again. Next slide. Now, what constitutes a quorum? What number represents a valid quorum? That's actually up to the EAC. And so the committee has the ability to define this number in the charter. For now, it's a simple majority, but once a charter is drafted, that can be defined within that document. It's worth noting that for most committees, a quorum usually remains a simple majority, which is half of all members plus one more. But in drafting a charter, again, the EAC could determine that a quorum can be reached with less than half of members. And the committee might want to consider doing this, defining a quorum as less than half of all members, because with the in-person exception ending at the end of this month, some individuals, some members of the EAC may find it difficult to travel throughout the state to participate in in-person meetings. And so to ensure that the EAC can still conduct business, it might be beneficial to set that quorum at a lower level so that those who can attend in person can still exercise their roles on the committee, even if there's less than half of members. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so now that we've discussed quorums, let's move to ex officio members. As part of the adopted scope to establish the Equity Advisory Committee. The committee is tasked with identifying 2 ex officio members. And for those of you who don't know, the term ex officio refers to those who are appointed or automatically given membership because they represent an official office or an agency. Ex officio members are often subject matter experts that can provide valuable feedback, discuss ideas with the committee, and ensure that adequate communication between the committee and local and regional transportation agencies is really there and consistent. Next slide, please. This brings us to our first potential action item for the committee. At this meeting, staff is recommending that the EAC takes action to approve 2 ex officio members for 2 organizations, the Regional Transportation Planning Agency Group and the Rural Counties Task Force. Both of these organizations represent local and regional transportation agencies across the state, and they've regularly collaborated with agency and the interagency staff to coordinate the funding and delivery of transportation projects. And so we really think that these could be valuable partners in terms of providing technical advice to the EAC as they weigh policy stances and consider different policies. Next slide. Now, there may be other partners that the EAC wants to consider in addition to these 2 organizations or instead of these organizations. And we really encourage you to have this discussion. We want to make it clear that staff is not requiring the EAC to approve membership of these 2 organizations or to even vote on this item at this meeting. This is a decision that's ultimately up to the EAC. This is your committee. And so we encourage members to discuss this, decide whether or not a vote on ex officio members is appropriate at this meeting or whether or not they want to postpone that for a later time. Next slide. Now, before we wrap up, let's briefly discuss the ways that the EAC can promote accountability, both externally with staff and internally among members and committee leaders, to make sure that there's a level of accountability that we as staff are held to when the committee presents us with recommendations. Staff plans to keep track of the recommendations and discussion topics that are considered by the EAC. Staff will report back to the EAC on whether or not the recommendations that they received were incorporated into policy somehow and adopted, and will clearly communicate why or why not they haven't been adopted. And so this is really intended to provide a large degree of transparency to members regarding how the staff is engaging with EAC recommendations. We also want to make sure that the EAC's recommendations reach audiences beyond interagency staff. And to this end, the CTC's commission annual report that's sent to the legislature each year is going to be featuring the EAC's work and policy recommendations and highlighting a lot of the key work that they've been doing so that state elected officials can also consider the merits of the committee's recommendations as well. These are some ideas that we have to ensure external accountability. And if anyone has any additional ideas to make sure that the voice of the committee is captured, we want to have that conversation. We want to hear them. So feel free to make any suggestions in that area. But it's also worth noting that the EAC might want to adopt mechanisms to hold its own members accountable, to hold committee leaders, chairs accountable. And these members, as Veronica, or these measures, as Veronica mentioned, could include establishing codes of conduct, establishing standards regarding participation so that members have a clear understanding of what's expected of them, the level of civility that they should be displaying in interacting with each other. And these measures could also include things like moderating the roles and responsibilities of committee leadership as needed. And so those are all things that could be included in the charter to ensure internal accountability. Next slide. And so as you all probably know by now, all of the key questions that we've discussed throughout this entire presentation, through Veronica's presentation as well, these are usually addressed in a committee's charter. The charter is a formal articulation of what a committee's governance structures, rules, procedures, and compensation details look like. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. And the goal now is really for members to take these questions and to take the information that was presented to you in this in this presentation, in Veronica's presentation, and form a charter that addresses these questions. So our plan is that over the summer, a subcommittee of interested EAC members is going to work together to develop a draft charter. Staff does not plan to limit the number of members who can take part in these committees, so anyone who's interested is able to join, but it's good for everyone to keep in mind that if there's more than 2 members, these meetings legally have to be publicly noted. And so that's an extra layer that might add into the process of forming a charter. Members will be compensated for time spent working in these subcommittees. And once a draft charter is formed, it'll be considered for approval by the EAC at a future meeting. And so that's what we envision as next steps so far. Next slide. And at this time, we'd love to hear any reactions you have, any comments or questions that you have in response to all the information that I just threw at you. So yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to present to you, and we'll be here for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jaden. Again, Jaden is an executive fellow with the California State Transportation Agency, and we now have an opportunity to open this up for discussion. And there are 2 primary objectives here. So one, we would like to allow EAC members to ask any clarifying questions. We have Jaden on the line, Veronica's still available, and then we also have the rest of our staff team to address any questions that you'd like to know about governance structures, some of the rules and procedures that we have to follow, discussion around the ex officio membership. And then in addition to asking any clarifying questions, we would love to hear from the committee just in terms of initial reactions or any thoughts around this. No decisions need to be made today, but we definitely want to start moving in the direction of forming a governance structure, drafting a charter, and establishing the procedures that this committee will specifically follow. So we'll be taking notes on that today. And then as Jaden mentioned, there is an action item associated with this presentation to determine whether or not the committee wants to accept the staff recommendations for the ex officio membership. Again, it's not necessary to vote on that today. If the committee would like more time to think through options and or bring forward their own recommendations for ex officio members, we can do that at a later meeting as well. So I'll pause there, and if folks have any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself.
Peggy Martinez here.
Go ahead, Peggy.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you both, Veronica and Jaden, for the thorough and thoughtful presentations. What strikes me is with regard to decision making and voting, the implication is that this committee could be voting or deciding on some, sort of far-reaching or important, whatever policy or whatever it is that we're deciding. And I think that is great, because I'd like to maybe have a description of the types of things that we are going to actually decide upon, because one of the things that I have wondered since applying for the EAC is trying to understand the actual sort of influence that this committee might have. So if someone could address that, I think that would help me as I consider, forming the leadership charter, the leadership piece of the charter, etc.
Thank you, Peggy. Yeah, that's a great question. I'd be happy to give an initial response, and then Sequoia, if you want to chime in on any additional content. I think in terms of the parameters of this committee and in terms of decision-making power, the largest item at hand is that this committee is set up in a way to make recommendations to CalSTA, CTC, and Caltrans. And then our agencies are in a position where we will need to track those recommendations and then provide a response to the committee in terms of whether or not we are acting on those recommendations, and if we are, what those next steps look like, and if we're not, why not. And so essentially it's a transparent, feedback loop. But Sequoia, did you want to add anything to respond to Peggy's question about the power of this committee as it stands?
Yeah, well, I'll pause there and ask Peggy, is that part clear? Could we elaborate more on that if needed?
No, that part is the clearest part. Like
Okay.
I've been really clear on the 3 agency piece, the whole since the inception, or since my initial viewing of the sort of idea of applying for the committee.
Yeah.
I'm interested in actual policy that this group could make a difference on.
Yes, this is a very important piece, and it's something that, as our 3 agencies, also we've been really trying to figure out how to ensure that the work of this committee has power and is meaningful, and to avoid being performative. So the ways that we see this committee being really establishing themselves and being part of this policy development and recommendations is through some of the activities, for example, the opportunities to collaborate that we were able to offer in the spring, and we intend to offer and make more clear in the future with a more detailed calendar of upcoming items, such as the funding guidelines that, for example, the commission develops for its programs, by including EAC members in that development through workshops or conversations or iterative processes, either on sections of guidelines or on broader pieces of it. We want to really have the committee have something to be in conversation with those processes with. And so in there, we really understand that that's where a lot of the power of the committee lies, as well as for example, the SB1 process of reviewing the applications that we involved EAC members in with the commission. That was, I think, kind of a first time for a lot of us bringing that level of review in, and I think it was really meaningful. And I know that those kind of shifts in the way that we're able to integrate this group of experts from the advisory committee also brings a lot of the expertise directly into what we're doing, and I can really speak for the commission on that.
Koya, this is Tanisha, and maybe to help go from the abstract to the practical, maybe we can ask Matthew. I know it's later on the agenda, but it seems like it might be a good opportunity for Matthew to talk about what we did with our SB1 guidelines in terms of working with what was previously the Equity Advisory Roundtable and taking the voice from the roundtable and incorporating it into policy, words, and action. So that the committee kind of sees from beginning to end, what does it look like when they provide feedback? What do we as the commission or any of the state agencies on the call do with that feedback? And then what does that turn into on the back end? That might maybe help give the committee a tangible, oh, here's what we're doing, or here's the type of things and how they will be used by the agencies kind of description.
Martha Armis-Kelly speaking on that. Before we go into that, I kind of want to go back to what Peggy was saying, because it's important, for us to be able to have a clear pathway, and maybe we should revisit. I know that you want to have us vote, or you're thinking that we should vote, but it seems to me that we need to establish what way or direction we're going to go with the governance part first off, because you were talking about, commission development, and I'm thinking there should be some kind of a bylaw or something written as to what the procedure is. You know, you were talking about how having, you know, the recommendations made, they might be reviewed or they're going to be reviewed, then the decision would be made. And if it wasn't using our recommendation, then we would have some type of response. Where is that written? So that's kind of like what I wanted to know. Like, is there something clear or a pathway that we could actually look at? Like you're saying, Tanisha, like something that we could really understand that that is how it's going to happen. Because otherwise we're kind of giving lip service and it's not going to go anywhere. And that's kind of, you know, the concern is making sure we know that there is going to be some substantial outcome from the discussions that we generate through the information that's given to us as we process it.
Can I actually
And
jump in?
this is Peggy, really quickly. I just wanted to tell you why I asked this question. And the reason I asked is because we're being asked to create our charter, and depending on what our real function is, we could have a really simple charter. Like, it doesn't need to be that complicated, you know? I mean, so it kind of, to me, knowing how the three entities see our guidance, see us as beneficial or, you know, helpful to the process, that then helps us, I think, determine what sort of charter that we would create. That's the reason I asked the question. So thank you.
I wanted to just chime in because I've actually been to the last CTC meeting, and I was also at the Bagley Keene training, and I had the privilege of, you know, living in San Francisco, so I didn't have to really go out of my way. But I just want to say that I think that there's a lot of room for us to provide input, and I think that a lot of people in the state want to talk to us, and it's really important that we establish a way for us to communicate what we think is important based upon the constituencies that we work with. I think it's important for us to create a venue for community members to come and bring their concerns to us, so that because what typically happens when community members go to meetings is that they go to the meeting and they're not speaking on the right item, and then they are embarrassed, and then they kind of acquiesce, and we lose the ability to bring people into the discussions. And so two specific examples I wanted to bring up, and it's escaping me what at the Bagley Keene training that I stated that I provided a suggestion because there was a question about how we could ensure that we weren't violating the rule. There's a rule of two, which is the unofficial rule of how we all as commissioners and committee members are supposed to discuss or to talk at all under the Bagley Keene Act. And then there's the rule of just establishing a quorum. And when we're seated at meetings with commissioners, it's a really critical time, and we're able to address circumstances and items just as they do. At least that's what happened at the Bagley Keene meeting, and I happen to be the only member that attended. So there's a wide berth if folks are able to create space in their lives to attend. The second example that comes to mind is at the San Francisco Commission meeting at the MTC. There was an item on Highway 37, and it was to add 2 lanes and 1 lane in each direction, making it a 4-lane roadway. And it would be the first legislation to take 2 general purpose lanes and to convert them to high occupancy toll lanes, which would also be for carpooling for free. If you're single occupancy or an electric vehicle, you would do the discount. I made the comment that it was very strange to me that the MTC was making this proposal without coupling it with the rail line, the rail corridor that's being proposed, an extension of SMART, the rail district for Sonoma Marin between Novato and Suisun City. So that comment was appreciated by the commission, and it caused the folks that were organizing around the project in Solano County and from the MTC to approach me after the meeting to have further discussions. So I couldn't say that on behalf of the EAC. I made it very clear that that recommendation wasn't on behalf of the EAC. But if we as a committee meet and we issue a report prior to each meeting that talks about the items on the agenda, if we have an equity study session prior to each meeting so that people can come and air their concerns, it creates a space for us to actually impact how funding decisions are made at the CTC. And I'll add lastly that I think that if there were a calendar with all three agencies, workflow, it would just make it a lot easier. Like I was able to participate in the STIP, the PIP, the PIF, and the three items that are going to be coming up at the end of the on the next agenda item. I participated in those, as many of us did, but the timeline was short. And so I know that moving forward, if we have an annual calendar, just as you're all working from at the state agencies, we'll be able to have a better ability to add comments. And thank you to Jaden and Veronica as well for your presentations.
Great, thank you, William. Naila, you have your hand up. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, let me first start by saying thank you everyone for the presentations. I think they were really helpful in kind of grounding this. I think I kind of went into signing up for the EAC with one idea in mind, and I appreciate this presentation that opens up a multitude of leadership models. I think I share some of like the concerns and questions that were asked earlier around like how much teeth does this group have? And then what is the right model to ensure that we can function well? But I also would just encourage other EAC members, and forgive me, this is like the contrarian and the organizer in me, that we also have the ability to push for our voices to be heard. So I would just keep that in mind for other EAC members, that like this is also what we make it. And so yeah, I just think I look forward to like future discussions and also just moving this forward. I think getting the structure right is really important, especially if this is a committee that's going to be preceding many of us that are on it. We want to make sure that we have the right structure up front that also not just serves us, but serves future iterations of this committee. So I think, yeah, I think we need to really sit with ourselves and not just ask the agencies what we want them to do, but as members that are on this committee, the inaugural members, what do we want to see this committee do? And then also use that to help build this structure. Those are just my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder to folks, as you are sharing in this discussion, feel free to reintroduce yourself just so that we know who's speaking. Feel free to raise your hand and I can call on you or just unmute. Connie, I see that your hand is up. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. It's Connie Stewart from the Redwood Coast. I just wanted to add my thanks. And also, I just wanted to say a little bit about the ex officio member suggestion. While I'm extremely interested in linking to other important groups, I'd like to figure out our governance structure before and bring that request back as part of that. But I would hope that in the meantime, the two organizations would liaise and attend meetings. And here's my thinking. A lot of times ex officio members are, you pick leadership within those organizations. And so we don't necessarily know their commitment to our, what our advisory committee has been formed to. And so I think I just want to make sure that we put something in the governance structure around that. And so that's just my thinking. I'm not opposed to the idea, but I like to have this taken care of before we start adding additional members. In my role, I have several committees that I'm an ex officio member, and honestly, with the exception of who says aye at the end of the discussion, you couldn't tell that I wasn't a member of the committee if you were there, which is why I'm a little concerned about adding them before we give them some function. As far as the other conversation, I just want to add a +1 to Nalia. I think that this opportunity is what we make it, and that we I've been really impressed with the outreach from staff and our ability, as we'll talk later, to be engaged. And the opportunities to be engaged. There are more opportunities I think that I would like to bring forward for us to have some say. And so I don't just want to leave it to the 3 agencies to tell us what they would like, because I think that we have some things to add as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie. Amber, go ahead.
I just want to second what Connie is saying as well. I do think that we need to establish this first before we bring in people from the outside.
Thank you, Amber. William, I see your hand is still up, but it might be an old hand. Let me know.
Old hand.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts or questions from the group, whether it's about generally around the charter or the ex officio members? I think Peggy has raised a really good question that seems to be very valuable for the space and something that we can continue to discuss more. And also anybody from our agencies are welcome to chime in as well. And I will also note that later in the agenda, as you all know, we'll be covering some of the items that our agencies have already interfaced with the EAC on, and then some of the upcoming opportunities. Jeannie, go ahead.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm Jeannie Ward-Waller, the Deputy Director for Planning and Modal Programs. I'm here with our Director and Chief Deputy. Couldn't join the meeting today, but just on their behalf, I think I want to just appreciate how important this conversation is about this group's charge, and also pass on, in recent discussion with the Caltrans Director, Tony Tavares, he did mention, really wanting this group to engage with some specific projects and some of our priority projects, things like highway capacity, some of the difficult issues we're wrestling with. So I want to appreciate what William had said about one of those projects and providing comments at the commission meeting, but just reinforcing that is really important to us at Caltrans. And we certainly have a lot of activity. We are the biggest of the 3 agencies, so I think there are a lot of things to engage with us on, probably more than this group has capacity. So we're certainly very interested in hearing your interest, but also we'll do our best to bring issues to you that we think are really relevant, that we'd like your input on. And I just want to reinforce, I think, charter or not, we will certainly be, putting a premium on the feedback that we receive from this group, since you are investing so much of your time and energy. So I just want to carry that message from Caltrans leadership and appreciate how important this discussion is. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeannie. Appreciate it. Randy, go ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, appreciate all that my colleagues have shared and staff. I agree as well that makes sense to me to really define the structure, select that before we expand with the ex officio members, in my opinion. And I'm looking at the different structure opportunities, leaning towards the expanded structure, because I see value in having a clear point of leadership with 1 chair. And I also see value in 3 to 5 vice chairs who can help, delegate some of that work and also kind of build capacity and get some experience to become chair down the road. So I like that model for that reason. But I'm open to other models if folks have a strong preference for one particular one.
Great. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate the feedback. Connie, go ahead.
I just want to second what Randy said about that. And I realized I should have just continued to say that. Yeah, but that would be my my preferred option too. And then as far as voting majorities I do feel like there are opportunities to have both a simple majority and a supermajority for certain issues, and depending on the different circumstances, but I would hope we would get to consensus.
Great, thank you, Connie. Other initial reactions from the groups. Again, no urgency to make any decisions at this point today, but we really want to get a feel for what people are thinking just in terms of a structure that works well for the EAC. And just keeping in mind that this will be the infrastructure essentially of the committee. And I think this is a process that will take time. We can work on this as we move through the summer months as well.
Peggy here.
Go ahead, Peggy.
Real quick, just want to say that I also think that the expanded leadership model is very, it increases capacity, and I think it could be a good way for us to go.
Noted. Thank you, Peggy. Axel, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, this is Axel with PolicyLink. Yeah, I appreciate the conversation and seeing all the options laid out is really helpful. I'm wondering if there is space for like a trial sort of situation where we try a leadership structure maybe for like 6 months or something. And if, we feel like it's working, we can establish it more permanently. Or if we make a decision, is that sort of like how we're going to be moving forward? And with no space for, trying other things out.
Yeah, good point and good question. I think a couple things that our staff have discussed, which might meet this request, is over the summer months, particularly as we prepare for our September meeting, we would really like to have a number of EAC members who are willing to help support us with the development of the next agenda and planning for what the rest of the year looks like. So that could be an opportunity to try out, perhaps an expanded leadership structure with co-chairs and a chair. There's that. And then also for the governance structure itself and the drafting of the charter, we'll be asking for folks to self-select if they're interested in working on that. And, particularly over the summer months, being able to bring a draft of that to our September meeting. And then that way we can run that past the committee for questions, reactions, take it back to the drawing board if we need to, and keep workshopping it. So that might partially address your request, but I guess there's nothing to say that we can't give a trial period to a governance structure before actually adopting it. Does anybody else from our team want to? Yeah, thank you, Sequoia.
This is Sequoia. That we can amend the charter at any time too, or if the group decides to.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you, Sequoia. So a charter in theory could be adopted. We could try it. And then if the committee wants to make some revisions, it can be amended.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Axel. Other thoughts, other questions from the group?
I would like to add, this is Sequoia, that kind of per the conversation we were starting to get into about the different ways that committee members have been involved and will be able to be involved in our interagency work. Our next item, we're going to really do a nice deep dive into that. And so I hope that that helps give us a little bit more grounding into what that currently looks like, which is by no means what we see as the final version of that. So I hope that helps kind of answer some of those questions.
Thanks, Sequoia. Yeah, just again to preview for the next item, we will recap some of the opportunities that EAC members have already been engaged with. And so for those of you who participated, you know firsthand what that looks like, but we'll be sharing back with the rest of the group. And then we also have some items coming down the pike that we will be presenting to the committee today, where you can engage with our agencies to support some of the work that we're doing. And then I think each of our agencies are also working particularly with our executive leadership and other bodies within the transportation agencies to identify some of these opportunities where you could have real and meaningful impact on the work that we're doing. We want to make sure that we bring those to you in a timely manner with a very clear ask and an expectation for what the workload would be. At this point, it is sounding like folks want to delay the decision around the ex officio members. I think that is perfectly fine. We want to establish a governance structure first prior to bringing in additional members to this committee. We can definitely defer this to our September meeting, but I want to provide an opportunity now if anybody else has other thoughts on that.
Is this a good time for us to self-nominate or nominate folks that we'd like to see on the committee to help establish the governance?
Yeah, I think we could do it right now, and then we'll also have an opportunity at the end of today's meeting where we have our whole laundry list of asks for committees or subcommittees that folks can self-select to be on. But if you want to make a recommendation or volunteer yourself, you can do so at this time.
I mean, I can wait, and I apologize. I'm in a weird situation, so I've seen the agenda, but if that's for later, let's do it later.
Okay, thank you, William. Another thing I'll note for everybody's benefit today is if you still want some time to think about some of these potential opportunities and whether or not you want to serve on a subcommittee, today won't be the final opportunity to, self-select into that. We'll send a follow-up email after this meeting as well with additional information, and folks can always choose to join one of the subcommittees at that time. Okay. We will be breaking in a minute so that folks have some time to just take care of themselves. But before I move us to a break, are there any other questions or comments? Okay, anything from our staff team? Okay, do we have any public comment at this time?
Thank you, Carolyn. I do not see anybody from the public indicating they wish to comment on this item. I want to check in with our Spanish interpreter quickly, and the Spanish interpreter just confirmed that there's no comment from there either. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, we have time for a 15-minute break, so we will reconvene at 3:10. Feel free to mute yourselves, turn off your camera, take care of what you need to, and then we'll see you back here at 3:10. Thank you all. All right, folks, welcome back from the break. Give everyone just a minute here to get settled. Okay. Could I get just a verbal okay from someone on our team that we're okay to move forward? Okay, so I see you're on, Jaden, you're on, perfect.
We're okay.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. So this takes us to tab 7 on the agenda, which is focused on interagency updates. This is going to be split into 2 separate categories. So one is past events that the committee members have already participated in. We have some updates and remarks from our staff members on these items, and following all of the updates, we'll have an opportunity for the committee members themselves to share their own reflections on their experience participating. And then the second category of items is going to be focused on future opportunities that committee members can be involved in. So with that, I will start with our past events, and the first one is going to be focused on the PFIP. So I'll hand it over to Mark Tollefson. Mark, go ahead.
I think Mark might be out, so I can provide his update in his place. Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Jaden.
Yeah, of course. Mark was looking forward to providing this update, but he was pulled out last minute to testify in front of the assembly. So he sends his apologies, but I think this really goes to show that this is a very busy time for state government right now. Around this time, the administration and the legislature are working to finalize the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Based on the work that we've seen so far, we expect transportation funding to continue to be strong, even as the state is looking at a growing budget shortfall. And to that point, CalSTA has awarded or will soon award billions of dollars to create a safer, more sustainable, more equitable transportation system. And I believe that this committee has a really vital role in informing consequential funding decisions like the ones that we'll be making in the coming months, in the coming years, so that we can be sure that we in government are moving in a positive direction. I speak for everyone at CalSTA when I thank the EAC for your helpful feedback on the $1.2 billion Port and Freight Infrastructure Program awards that CalSTA will be announcing in the coming weeks. As we all know, California's ports and supply chain infrastructure are critical to the state and national economy, but have had major environmental and equity impacts on frontline communities. As one of the first programs to undergo EAC review, we appreciate your collaboration and your perspective for this historic one-time program as we work to create a more efficient, sustainable, and equitable supply chain. And continuing on the topics of award announcements, last month, CalSTA awarded more than $690 million to 28 new public transportation projects in disadvantaged communities as part of our Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, or TIRCP for short. Due to the accelerated timeline for the TIRCP cycle, we unfortunately weren't able to brief the EAC before announcing these awards. But that funding in April follows more than $2.5 billion in January, and for a total state investment of more than $3.2 billion in public transportation in just the first 4 months of this year. These investments represent our continued work to accelerate the transition to a cleaner, healthier transportation system for all Californians. And we're optimistic that this investment of over $3 billion this year will go a long way in furthering these goals. I know that everyone at agency is really excited to continue working with the EAC to do this, and I'd like to thank you all for attending and your participation today. And that's it from agency.
Wonderful, thank you, Jaden. Okay, moving on to our next update. Do we have Matthew Yazgat here?
Yes, I am here.
Perfect, go ahead, Matthew.
One moment, thanks, Carolyn. So yes, good afternoon, committee members, and it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. As mentioned, I'm Matthew Yazgat, and I'm the Deputy Director for SB1 Programming here at the Commission. I'm happy to share an update today from our SB1 competitive programs evaluation process that we've taken on this past spring. Back in early January 2023, we solicited interest from this Equity Advisory Committee for members who would be willing to work with the SB1 programming staff to evaluate transportation projects with respect to how well they demonstrated community engagement. The three competitive SB1 programs are the Local Partnership Program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. And community engagement was a critical evaluation criteria in each one of them. Before the current SB1 program guidelines were adopted this past August 2022, Commission staff developed the community engagement evaluation criteria and the SB1 competitive programs transportation equity supplement in concert with the Commission stakeholders and direct input from the Commission's Equity Advisory Roundtable, which preceded the Equity Advisory Committee. The community engagement evaluation criteria requires project applicants to demonstrate how they engage the community to identify community identified needs, namely those communities that are disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized. The criteria was also required, the criteria also required applicants to demonstrate how that feedback was incorporated into the project and how the applicant agency developed the project scope through collaboration with disadvantaged or historically impacted and marginalized communities. Ultimately, the inclusion of this evaluation criteria in this most recent round of SB1 competitive programs was intended to ensure that projects which were more equitable and promoted equitable outcomes could better compete for funding based on this criteria as a merit. We received interest from 7 EAC members to evaluate this criteria for the projects submitted for consideration in our SB1 competitive programs. The 7 members evaluated each transportation project with respect to that project's response to the community engagement criteria. Each EAC member's ratings became the community engagement rating for that project, which was included with the ratings for each other evaluation criteria of a given project. This meant that our EAC members owned and directly contributed to a portion of our project evaluations that would ultimately determine the overall competitiveness of each project, directly influencing our staff recommendations. We're very appreciative of the support and input we received from the EAC, especially considering the committee was in its earliest of stages as a formal committee when we started requesting input. The feedback we received was valuable for enhancing our staff recommendations, but also for providing us with very, very valuable feedback that can be shared with project applicants who were both successful or unsuccessful in being recommended for funding. I want to say, I know that this is the kind of collaboration that commissioners and commission staff would want to continue and to build upon in future cycles, because having the subject matter expertise of our EAC members has certainly enhanced our staff recommendations, which will be published later this week on June 8th. In a bit of a response to the prior agenda item, I want to say I also believe that this is the type of feedback, in this particular instance being direct evaluation of project applications, that I believe provides the EAC with a tangible and actionable responsibility that can influence and enhance transportation funding outcomes. Before I turn it back over to Carolyn, I would like to personally thank the following EAC members who put in several hours each of time and effort to work with us on this effort. So thank you to Alex Contreras, Cheryl Villegas Walker, Connie Stewart, Mike Despain, Naila Popardin, Peggy Martinez, and Stella Ursua. And with that, I appreciate your time, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, Carolyn.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matthew. Our next update is on the LTCAP guidelines, so I'll hand it over to Rebecca Light.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Carolyn. Before I give my update, Carolyn, do you want me to pop on camera or would you rather it be off?
That is entirely up to you, whatever you prefer.
All right, well, I'll turn it on. I don't know if you can see me or not, but can you see me? I can't see myself.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here to give an update on the LTCAP For members who maybe aren't aware of the LTCAP, it's a brand new program funded through federal Protect dollars with a one-time augmentation from the California legislature. So it's a 5-year program funded funded with 400.5 million over 5 years for the direct support to local regional agencies looking to implement climate adaptation projects on their system. And so we sent out an email through Sequoia to the EAC to ask if any members were interested in looking over the guidelines and having a workshop. And so 3 of you responded. Thank you very much again to Stella, Cheryl, and William for attending the LTCAP presentation and having excellent conversation during the review of the program's guidelines. We let those 3 know that with the development of the LTCAP being on a very short timeline, we were unable to do the sort of really robust, meaningful engagement with the AAC we really wanted to do. And I extended my apologies, and I want to do it here as well to the broader EAC as well. We were just under a very short timeline to get this program up and running. However, we want to ensure that the EAC is involved with future activities. And so the guidelines were adopted by the commission at the May commission meeting. The call for projects is open for applicants, and they have until July 31st to submit. After that, the next few months, August, September, will be devoted to application evaluations. And so similar to SB1 program, like the solutions for congested corridors that EAC members had been involved in for evaluation, we want to do something similar. We don't know quite what that's going to look like yet. We're still formulating internally how the evaluations will go for the LTCAP, but we'll be sure to keep in regular communication with Sequoia and Carolyn so that you're more informed when that happens later on in the fall. The program of projects will be adopted at the December commission meeting in 2023. And then almost immediately after that, we will begin updating the guidelines for the second cycle. And so that is really where we'll be able to get the EAC members in at the very beginning rather than towards the end of the process. And that concludes my update.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Our last update on past opportunities that the EAC has engaged in is about the STIP guidelines. We have Casey Ruggiero. I apologize if I've mispronounced your last name, but Casey, are you on?
I am on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. My name is Casey Ruggiero, and I am the program manager of the State Transportation Improvement Program. I met with a few of the EAC members back on May 4th to provide an overview of the State Transportation Improvement Program and to present its new community engagement section within the draft guidelines. Comments were received and incorporated, so thank you very much. Upcoming activities for the STIP include at the June commission meeting, which is being held on June 28th and 29th of this month, the draft 2024 State Transportation Improvement Program guidelines will be presented. This is an opportunity for the regions, Caltrans, and members of the public to provide comment. Written comments are also welcomed and can be emailed to me. My email address is available on the Commission's website under the State Transportation Improvement Program. On July 19th, 2023, a joint workshop will be held with Caltrans to discuss the draft guidelines and Caltrans's fund estimate. And finally, the final 2024 STIP guidelines will be adopted at the August 2023 Commission meeting. And that concludes my item. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Casey. I'd like to give committee members an opportunity now to share any reflections that they have based on their experience participating in these opportunities, or perhaps any questions that folks have if they were unable to participate. Feel free to raise your hand or simply unmute yourself. Go ahead, William.
Quick, I just want to say for folks who are worried about whether we're going to have an impact, I think it's just being able to step up for these opportunities and as a committee, making sure that we hold our staff accountable to make sure that there's more lead time so that people can, you know, participate and feel that it's meaningful. But I mean, and we all understand these are the growing pains of a brand new committee, but I think that we've made quite an impact in the short time that we've been in these roles, and we just have to lean in because folks are really waiting to hear from us. So.
Yeah, thank you, William. Stella, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. Stella Ursua from Great Alternatives, the LA office. And I just want to reiterate what William said, you know, great opportunity for us to, you know, obviously make sure that our voices are included in the discussion. I thought it was really interesting, some of the projects that I was evaluating. Obviously, it was around the level of community engagement that these, you know, the various organizations and entities completed. And, you know, it was really great to see some of those organizations and just how deep they went into trying to gather that feedback. And then there were some that were a little disappointing, where it was like, wow, really? you actually included this in your, you know, in your application. It wasn't a heck of a lot. You know, and just a couple of the applications, but very interesting to see the process and just to review the projects that were being you know, promoted or, you know, proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. Connie, go ahead.
Hi, Connie Stewart from Redwood Coast again. I just want to reiterate that point. First of all, I just want to thank Matthew and his team. It was fabulous working with you. I thought the meeting we had to kind of give us an overview of the program was just fantastic. I would really like to also say, you know, I think one of the things I had to read all of the application. I mean, it was just, some were really, really impressive and far more than my region's doing as far as community outreach. I honestly think there is an opportunity to put together a panel of how to do community engagement in an equitable way from some of the folks that were more. And I was almost thinking that there's an opportunity to put some guides together, because I do think that there are regions in the state where there's well-meaning people, but they just don't have the same opportunities or to learn about authentic engagement. So I would love to see us think about something that could be proactive for the next round to highlight those that we scored really well. Or maybe even for us to put out some advice, because it was really, it gave me some great insight and some thoughts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Connie. Peggy, go ahead.
Yeah, just want to chime in on this. So yes, thank you, Matthew. I learned quite a lot from the process, and I want to definitely say how much I appreciate the idea that our input is directly reflected in the, you know, and how these SB1 grant applications are going to be sort of evaluated. Yeah, there was quite a difference in you know, some folks just are incredible at engagement and outreach, and others really need, you know, maybe some education. So yeah, we've talked about that here locally. Connie, maybe we should connect. There, we know that there are, you know, I think a panel, like a way of teaching folks around the state how to do, you know, accessible, equitable engagement would be super useful, and that could really, really help up people's games that really could use, you know, funding, that really could, but their engagement pieces were a little lacking, and I I was not, I mean, let me just put it this way. I really gave a lot of praise and kudos to the folks that did do a good job. And so I won't say what I thought about the people that didn't, but anyway, it was a great process. So thank you all.
Thank you, Peggy. Matthew, go ahead.
Thanks, Carolyn. First, I just want to say I really appreciate the comments from Connie and Stella and Peggy. And I really appreciate the feedback that you had, Connie, about maybe setting up a panel and not maybe within, I'm not going to say within the EAC space, because I don't think it's my purview to suggest that we do that, but maybe those of you who worked with us on our SB1 programs, and I know we wanted to have a debrief, in which we will still plan on doing. That would be a great conversation for us to think about, because as you know, Connie, as one of our past equity advisory roundtable members, we did try to get something out that had like best practice strategies for community engagement in our equity supplement that we added to our SB1 guidelines last cycle. And I think it would be wonderful to build on that in our next iteration of program guidelines, and actually involve our stakeholders in a workshop or two around that topic. So I know we heard Jeannie say earlier that there's a lot of stuff that Caltrans would like to solicit input on from the EAC. And you know, the SB1 programs are competitive, and we're on 2-year cycles, and we talk about guidelines every time we get up to asking for a call for projects. So it's right around the corner, believe it or not. We'll be talking about guidelines in 6 or 7 months, which my team, for those that are listening, are probably wondering if there's ever a pause, but I would love the feedback, continued feedback, and again, considering evaluations in our programs moving forward. So thank you. We appreciated your support and your feedback today.
Great, thank you for that, Matthew. Are there any other comments from the committee members? Any other reflections that folks want to share? Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead, Connie.
I'll just add, you know, what was really interesting to me, and there's somewhere I know that someone did a chart similar with youth, but it really did go to community led, you know, equity led, where they let the community pick the project and really own the project, to we just translated a project we wanted to do into English and Spanish. And you know, like I said earlier, there's a world where that seems like equity, you know, but where they have never seen the other world. And so it would be, I think, really powerful to, not in the equity space, but in the commission space, just give a brief overview. Maybe we should think about just one of us appearing during public comment or something, just to give a quick overview at a future meeting.
Well, Connie, this is Tanisha with the commission. I think that's a great idea, and we can work to get that on a future agenda, so that we're creating this feedback loop between the work that the committee is doing and how the committee is influencing that work and what we're seeing as our guidelines transition. And I think we're in a period in between where we're developing our guidelines, where it's a great opportunity, maybe during that equity advisory committee update that we have on the commission meeting, to bring somebody in to talk about kind of these lessons learned, what went well, how can we improve, so then we can feed it into our guidelines as well.
Thank you, Tanisha, and thank you, Connie. Any last comments from the committee members? Okay. Hearing none, that takes us to the second portion of this, which is focused on future opportunities for the EAC members. So first, we'd like to hear from Bridget Driller, who will be presenting on the RTP guidelines. Bridget, are you still on?
Yeah, I am here. Thank you, Carolyn. My name is Bridget Driller, and I serve as the Commission's Associate Deputy Director for Transportation Planning. And you heard Matthew talk about some of the program guidelines that the Commission maintains. The California Transportation Commission also maintains guidance for the development of several different types of long-range transportation plans, including the California Transportation Plan, regional transportation plans, and multimodal corridor plans. I'm here today to talk briefly about the Regional Transportation Plan guidelines, which we are in the process of updating. And California is divided into many regional agencies for transportation, including metropolitan planning organizations, which represent the state's more urban regions, and regional transportation planning agencies, which represent the state's rural counties. So these regional agencies are required to develop regional transportation plans every 4 to 5 years. And these RTPs are long-range planning and policy documents that talk about the unique characteristics of a region and identify the needed transportation improvements over a long time frame. So the Commission is recently released the first draft of the Regional Transportation Plan Guidelines for MPOs for public comment. We are currently collecting feedback on the draft guidelines to incorporate into a second draft that we plan to present to the Commission in October. So my item today is just a preview. I hope to return to a future meeting of the Equity Advisory Committee if the committee members decide that it makes sense. And in the future, I would love to discuss proposed changes with you all and get feedback on specific areas of the guidelines, such as environmental justice, equity, engagement, and accessibility. In the meantime, if any of you are interested in getting more involved in this topic, there are a couple of opportunities to do so. One is that we're planning to have a public workshop the afternoon of July 12th, where we'll talk about some of the initial proposed changes. We also have several technical work groups that help to craft specific language edits for the guidelines. And so if you would like to be involved in one of those work groups, they meet roughly monthly. Carolyn actually helps lead our work group around equity and engagement. So you can let Carolyn or Sequoia know if you're interested in learning more, and they can connect you to me via email. That concludes my remarks, and I'll turn it back to Carolyn.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bridget. So the next two items on here are from Caltrans. One is not listed, I apologize, but it is in the book item. So I'm going to present on the statewide equity listening sessions, as well as the Caltrans Equity Index. So to start, I will focus on an opportunity that pertains to the statewide equity listening sessions. As many of you might know, throughout 2022, Caltrans, the Commission, and CalSTA held a series of statewide equity listening sessions in 6 California communities. The sessions were designed to center California residents. These had a geographic focus on priority populations that have been historically marginalized in the planning, funding, and delivery of our transportation infrastructure. The listening sessions are among a series of planned actions and investments across our transportation agencies, which are really geared toward improving policies and practices to better reflect principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if any of you tuned into our last commission meeting, you'll now know that the actionable report is currently available and available to the public. And this report features findings and recommendations from the 6 sessions. This was released earlier in the spring, and the report will really be used to guide our executive staff in their efforts to enhance organizational structures around equity. We're also looking at the report to guide us in how we build relationships and inform how the state transportation agencies can continue to improve engagement with communities statewide. To date, the preliminary report has been circulated to executive leadership across Caltrans, CalSTA, and the Commission, as well as our Caltrans Division of Safety Programs and our Caltrans Legal Division. As I mentioned before, the findings and recommendations were also presented at the most recent Commission meeting held last month. And sections of this report focused on the session summaries were also reviewed by our Caltrans district leadership with a more local perspective, as well as the community-based organizations that supported this initiative. So that brings me to my ask for the committee. At this point, our interagency team and our executives have been collaborating on the development of next steps in response to the recommendations that were set forward in this report. We would really like the committee's involvement in this work. So for folks who might be interested in this, we're looking for EAC members to weigh in on next steps, provide some guidance for what our transportation agencies could do in response to the recommendations. We have a starting point that we're working on, but we'd love your guidance or your recommendations in addition to that. And then more broadly speaking, looking at how we can take this work and expand upon it in terms of our engagement that we do with communities statewide. So that is an opportunity that the EAC can weigh in on. That's the statewide equity listening sessions. And then the second item that I would like to bring to the committee is focused on the Caltrans Equity Index. Some of you might be familiar with this, but it's sort of been in the workshop phase for a while. So I'll give you a quick overview and then I can outline what it is that we're asking of the committee members if this piques your interest. So to operationalize Caltrans's commitment to equity, the department is developing what we're calling the Caltrans Transportation Equity Index, or EQI. And the EQI is really a screening and evaluation tool that utilizes multiple transportation-specific and socioeconomic indicators to identify transportation-based priority populations. And this is done at the census block level, so a much more granular level, which will help us truly inform some of our transportation decisions. And we recognize that many mapping tools exist that evaluate the impact of the built environment. Many of you are probably familiar with these, such as CalEnviroScreen. But these tools typically consider a wide range of factors that aren't explicitly focused on the transportation system. Caltrans aims to bridge this gap by creating this index, and ideally this will inform how the department can best address and mitigate inequities in our state's transportation system. The EQI is also designed in a manner to support our partner agencies and other entities who might voluntarily use the EQI to analyze the impacts or evaluate the effectiveness of their own transportation projects and proposed solutions. Just to provide a little bit of context in terms of the development of this tool so that you know where you're entering into the process, Caltrans began developing the EQI back in 2020. And during this early development of the Equity Index, Caltrans held numerous public and internal discussions featuring indicators, thresholds, geographies, and other issues related to the tool. The beta version of this tool is still under development and it's subject to additional revisions, but we're at a point where the tool's construction is nearly complete and we're beginning to focus more on the rollout and the implementation of the EQI. The department does plan to release the 1.0 version of the tool in mid-2023. Most likely that will be July. And then we'll begin to focus on the development of use cases beginning this summer, which will be followed by a public review process that will continue into next year. As I mentioned, we are still in the developmental phase of determining how the tool will be applied to Caltrans planning, funding, and decision-making processes. And we would really like to engage the committee in this work. Your perspectives and insight will be valuable as we determine the best way to apply this tool to our work, as well as the work of external partners. So in addition to feedback on the implementation of this tool, we'd also like your feedback on our continued public engagement process as we roll this out. And I'll just flag for timeline, the majority of this work will take place over the summer, but there will be additional opportunities to engage with the EQI as we move into fall and winter. So I will pause there. And then we have one more item as an opportunity for the committee members to participate in, and this is focused on reconnecting communities. So I'd like to hand it over to Gretchen Chavez at this point. Gretchen, are you on?
I am figuring out how to unmute myself and all those fun things. Thank you so much, Carolyn. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gretchen Chavez. I'm the Chief of the Office of Innovative Programs in Caltrans Division of Local Assistance. And I just want to thank you today for the opportunity to provide a brief overview of a new state pilot program, Reconnecting Communities, Highways to Boulevards. This is a $149 million program that was established in fiscal year 22-23. This is a one-time state pilot to fund projects aimed at reconnecting underserved communities that were historically harmed and divided by transportation infrastructure. So this program is definitely a pilot. It begins with a strong foundational principle that any reconnection effort must reflect community identified needs and solutions. And that foundational guiding principle that we follow is that of a community self-determination. Our job, we feel, is to support and help communities identify their needs and solutions, and then to leverage the state funding with federal and other mission-based funding opportunities to implement those community-driven solutions. So the journey for this program began with the legislative vision. And through the Division of Local Assistance, we began stakeholder outreach for guideline development in late 2022. We held 2 guideline development workshops with a wide variety of stakeholders and realized that our traditional approach to grants and project selection was not going to meet the vision of the legislation or that foundational guiding principle in supporting community self-determination. So we took a step back from the work that we had done. We met with Housing and Community Development. We attended the Strategic Growth Council conference earlier this year. We spoke with a broader range of stakeholders and re-envisioned what this pilot program could look like. And from that point, we moved on with, again, this new pilot concept and identifying 3 grant categories, which are rural, urban, and corridor. We then went back and held additional guideline workshops. We invited CBOs and nonprofits to participate. We held tribal listening sessions. We sent out questionnaires to all known stakeholders requesting feedback. We held additional focus groups for just the rural, urban, and corridor discussions, and really aiming to make sure that these guidelines are going to really support communities in these different areas. And then we began some preliminary coordination engagement with our own Caltrans districts on how to do additional outreach with local communities and begin partnering conversations, because these are projects that would involve state highway system. And of course, we presented at various meetings and workshops, including the Native American Advisory Committee, CTC, RTPA, and other groups. But in this journey, we ultimately came up with a framework for the pilot that starts with meeting communities where they are today. So our typical project phasing starts with planning and then moves to environmental design and construction. And funding is more competitive and secured and sought for each individual phase. The shift in the paradigm for this pilot is that we're going to select communities based on need, historical harm, and community partnering opportunities, rather than identifying a community based on a specific project. So this is where we added a new phase to this paradigm called community readiness. And the community readiness portion, we're going to support communities developing their partnerships and establishing them up front. And that partnership is going to be the basis to support that community identification of problems and needs and develop a roadmap to address those needs. So this phase includes, again, establishing the additional partnerships, looking into potential grant opportunities for leveraging the reconnecting community funding, and looking at potential for any concurrent phase and phase component delivery. If prior efforts were done by the local community, that's great. We're not going to start over. We're going to meet the communities where they are. We're going to look at efforts that have already been done if they have community partnerships established, and we're going to work with them to meet sort of the elevated goals of this program and move it forward towards the planning and future environmental phases and so forth. Community readiness will lead us then into those typical project phases. However, the selected communities in this paradigm don't have to compete for additional funding for the Highways to Boulevards program. When we're select them, we're committing that we're going to use all the funding that's available in this program to help meet their needs and deliver what projects that we can, and again to help them leverage those funds with other federal and private funding sources. A cornerstone of this pilot program is what we're calling community involvement. And this is something that's different than our typical community engagement, which usually occurs in just the planning phase of a project. In this idea, community involvement or that community partnership will occur in all phases of the project, and we'll have long-term commitment and relationships that are built with that community. And again, the paradigm shift here is looking to offer funding that meets the needs of the community rather than the community looking for projects that meet the definition of the funding source. This shift allows communities to tell us what they need and supports that community self-determination. Again, Caltrans is here to support, not direct. Throughout the project, the key goal of this is to streamline activities, deliver as many concurrent activities as possible, and identify and implement construction elements that can be delivered early to try to bring relief whenever we can to those communities. So for next steps, our call for communities or the application period will be announced June 20th. That'll open and proposals will be due roughly September 15th. During that time, we'll hold multiple virtual application workshops, virtual office hours with potential applicants, really working with communities to make sure that they've got a good project application put together. We will establish 3 evaluation panels of 7 people. Those panels will consist of 4 external partners representing tribal communities, equity subject matter experts, and local transportation project and planning subject matter experts. The evaluation teams will also include 3 internal Caltrans representatives who are also subject matter experts in equity, corridor management, and planning activities. Each of these teams will review and evaluate one of the 3 categories. Again, that was urban, rural, or corridor. Successful applicants will then be announced late 2023, early 2024. And this is going to align us with our first effort to leverage funds, which is the Federal Reconnecting Communities Cycle 3. So really, in short, the work for this program has really just begun. We are in essence building this ship as we're sailing it. But I think that by keeping this founding principle of community self-determination in the forefront of our minds, that I'm excited we're going to be able to deliver a really new and innovative program that could really change how we do businesses with communities. And with that, that sort of summarizes this whole new program. I don't know if there's any comments or.
Thank you, Gretchen. At this point, we can take clarifying questions or comments about any of the items that were presented as opportunities. So if folks have questions around reconnecting communities, the Highways to Boulevards pilot program that Gretchen just presented on, or the RTP guidelines that Bridget presented on, or the statewide equity listening sessions, or the equity index that I presented on, we can take those now. Martha, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that all your programs and all of the work that you're doing is very encouraging and exciting. Our last speaker, Mrs. Chavez, and I don't know, Miss Chavez, I just wanted to tell you that is exciting. So many times when we as tribal entities, because we're not federally recognized or because they're smaller communities or they're not able to put together a grant because they don't have the capacity, they don't apply. They simply do not apply because it's just too hard, too cumbersome, and it looks like a mountain they can never even step over. So to hear that you're willing to take on communities where they're at and meet them at their needs and kind of like shift the way of grant funding upside down, you're really turning it up on its ear, is it's quite a feather in the department's cap, and I just say kudos. And I'm super excited for those that are going to apply. I'd be interested in working with you in the areas of tribal entities, as I am an advocate for United Tribes of California. As far as Carolyn, I would love to be able to participate in that portion of your work, and I'm just very encouraged by all the programs and all the things that are being done. I did not get to participate in the SB1, but I'm glad to know that, again, when I say I don't want to be tokenized, I don't mean it in a way that is like, that's how it's going to be here. I say it in the sense that we need to just be mindful of the injury that many communities have. And as we're developing equitable spaces, we have to be equitable even in our spaces, so that we could say that we actually are using the verbiage and not just saying it, but really being mindful. And it's clear that we're doing that. And it's clear that there are folks that are engaged and want to make that difference. And I just had to touch on that subject to make sure that people are clear and understanding that I'm positive about what we're doing. I just want to make sure that we're transparent about how we're conducting it.
Great point. Thank you, Martha. Randy, go ahead.
Thanks, everyone. I love the spirit of the program. This is really important for our community in City Heights. We've been negatively impacted by 3 different freeways that run through the middle of our community, and a highway, Old Highway 80 as well. I'm looking at the criteria. So just to confirm, the project isn't just for highways, right? It could also be a street, unsafe street that's posing a barrier to communities that we can focus on as well.
So the legislation is aimed at larger transportation infrastructure projects, particularly highways and reconnection. And the federal program that we're trying to leverage against is also aimed at those larger transportation infrastructure facilities. So it's, is there room in the program to pilot smaller transportation infrastructure barriers or something like that? Perhaps, but I don't know in terms of the federal program, which is our first and foremost fund leveraging source, that it would compete well. And if you go through the guidelines, we really align with that federal program in terms of some of the qualifications and the communities to ensure that we're positioning ourselves in those communities to have access to that future federal funding. But we can't, there's so many nuances to this program. we can talk more about it if you like, but
okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Randy. Martha, go ahead.
Going back to Randy's question, I also wanted to just chime in on this. This last winter or February, California was affected by the floods, and namely some of the Central Valley was heavily impacted by the rains. And it brought up the question of, when you're talking about freeways and infrastructure and causeways for transportation, would something along the areas of flooding be, environmental justice, environmental impacts, could they be also a consideration for that grant funding? Because I could imagine that there's many jurisdictions that were, wiped out, where their connections to main thoroughfares or corridors were interrupted. So would that be something that would constitute that?
I think it depends on the program itself, but the state and federal is really focusing on the historical harm from transportation infrastructure, like the freeways and highways that were built. On an outside, did those transportation barriers lead to evacuation route issues? Is there another tie-in to that would look directly at this program? I know the LTCAP program is really looking at evacuation routes and has more of that climate, that's the climate adaptation to it. So there are there is some focus to this highway program. Again, looking at those highways and freeways as one of the main infrastructure components. I think we also can look at trains. The rail infrastructure is also an eligible component, and there's 5 or 6 components of transportation infrastructure that would make a community eligible for the program.
Thank you. That answers my question. Thank you so much.
Do we have any other questions from the group about any of the topics or opportunities that were presented on?
Will you be sending us an email so we can get engaged, or how would
Yes.
you like to handle that?
Yeah, good point, Connie. So a couple things, and I know we are at time, so we will try and wrap this up quickly. I want to be mindful of everyone's schedules. A couple things, as we move into the next item on the agenda, we'll be asking very quickly for folks who want to express interest in any of these opportunities, but we will also be sending a follow-up email to the group. So if folks want to still think about it a bit and respond a little bit later, you'll still have an opportunity to do so. So before I move us to the next agenda item, are there any other clarifying questions from the group? And do we have any public comment on this item?
Thank you, Carolyn. No, I do not see anybody from the public indicating they wish to comment on this item.
And do we have any public comment from the Spanish language line?
Yeah, checking in with the Spanish line. No, we do not have any comment there either. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Justin. Okay, so this takes us to tab 8, which is essentially focused on next steps. So very briefly in the time that we have, I do want to run through some of the opportunities for the EAC members where you can express interest. We'll take note of your names and then we'll follow up with more details. As I mentioned earlier in the agenda, we are thinking about having folks support our staff with developing the next agenda so that the committee members themselves can really guide the content that we cover during these meetings. So if there are any folks who are interested in supporting that process, you could raise your hand now or feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, William, I see your name. Other folks from the group. Martha, perfect. Anyone else who's interested in this item? Okay, can always come back to that one. Really, oh, sorry, Casey, go ahead. Never mind, accidental unmute. Okay, I will also mention before we get any further into this item, one consideration, and it's not a limiting factor, but it's just something to keep in mind. If we have more than 2 committee members who are interested in working on a subcommittee, then we just need to publicly notice the meetings of that subcommittee. So it's totally possible to do so, but just keeping that in mind for folks. I don't want that to deter anybody from volunteering. Okay, let's move on to the potential subcommittee focused on developing the charter for the EAC. Do we have anybody who's interested in this item? All right, William. Connie. Naila. Randy. Martha. Amber. Alex.
Peggy.
And Peggy, perfect. Okay, anybody else? Taylor, Martha, Amber, Alex, Peggy, William. Great, okay, thank you all for enthusiastic interest in that. Okay, that takes us to these interagency opportunities that we just presented on. So there are several opportunities. The first one being the RTP guidelines update. And that's the item that Bridget presented on. Okay. And I'm gonna, again, read names just to make sure these aren't old hands. It looks like Martha, William, Connie, Naila, and Amber.
Peggy here quickly to say that I will let you guys know the ones I'm interested in after the meeting.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Peggy. Appreciate it. Okay. We have the statewide equity listening sessions. Do we have anybody who's interested in this item? Connie, I see your hand. Stella. Anyone else who's interested? Okay. And then we have the statewide equity index, the transportation equity index, also known as the EQI. Okay, I see William's hand. Stella, as long as that's not an old hand. We have Amber. We have Axel. We have Alex. Martha. And okay. Last call for that one. And then finally, we have the Reconnecting Communities, Highways to Boulevards pilot program. Okay, Amber, Randy, Axel, Alex, Martha, William, anyone else? Okay, great. Well, thank you all. This is
May I ask
wonderful.
a question?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, William.
I'm just curious, is there a way that now that we've declared that we're interested in these items, can there still be like an announcement about the ones that we didn't sign up for, like so that if we're able to attend, we can attend?
Yeah, not a problem. I think what would be valuable, in addition to following up after this meeting to let folks know, that they still have an opportunity to express their interest, we can always keep the entire committee apprised of when these subcommittees are meeting and the timeline that they're on. So if there are any upcoming meetings or any changes in people's interests, then we can definitely do that. The only distinction I will make is that if we believe we only have a subcommittee of 2 and we move forward under that understanding and we don't publicly notice that meeting, then we would have to leave it at the maximum of 2 members. But for future meetings, we could definitely make arrangements to publicly notice it and then have other folks join.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great question. Okay, really quickly, I don't know if these are old hands, but Alex, did you have a comment or a question?
No, sorry, I forgot to lower my hand after the last call.
No worries. And Martha, same for you?
No, I just had a question. Once we start having these sessions and we start putting together our ideas and kind of like formatting what direction we're taking, do we report back to the group as a whole as we're proceeding with these types of interactions, so that everyone else, even though they're not participating, they're going to be able to have like a good understanding of how the project's moving and how those decisions are being shaped? That way, it's not like we're blindsided afterwards. It's like, oh, we should have said something, or we could have, given input to give opportunity to the group as a whole. Because I imagine that even if there's someone that didn't raise their hand, they might have wanted to participate, but for whatever reason, commitments, or they're just not sure of how that is going to, take place, might want to be able to chime in and give back some feedback as we're processing.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. That's a great point. Rather than just presenting an update when, the item itself has concluded, I think it would be incredibly valuable to have the committee members to be able to report back and update the other members throughout the process. So we can definitely build that in. And I think each subcommittee can determine for themselves what makes sense in terms of an update and a timeline. But I think we'll make a note of that just so that it is a top priority. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. The only other item in terms of committee involvement, this is a more general one, but since we did not vote on the ex officio membership at this point, and I know from the group, it sounded like folks want to determine what the governance structure will be for the EAC before doing so. I do just want to put out there that if any of the committee members have recommendations that they would like to bring forward for those ex officio members, please do so. You can either send that to us via email or be prepared to bring that at the next meeting, which will be held in September. So that's not a committee necessarily, but just something to keep in mind for anybody who is interested or has a preference around that. Okay, moving along quickly. Are there any committee announcements? And this can be anything that the committee members want to bring forward at this time. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. All right, Connie, go ahead.
Hi there. I think I sent some information to staff regarding what's going on with the Broadband for All initiative and the Middle Mile initiative. Caltrans had scheduled a statewide meeting to discuss it. However, they had technical difficulties and need to reschedule. But for quick update, there's $2 billion going into creating a middle mile using Caltrans right away in SB 156. And I think it would be great for us to get a little update from Caltrans, especially looking through an equity lens as they move forward. We do want to make sure that communities that have been overlooked in other broadband funding are there. I know we had a very difficult meeting with the Middle Mile Committee around access to tribal areas in our region where there were many hurt feelings that we're working through. And so I think looking at this at a statewide level would be important.
Thank you, Connie.
I had one more thing to add.
Go ahead, Martha.
Do you think that in the future, and I don't know how we're going to construct things and the like, but I think that there's a lot of value in all the members that are part of this group. And just like when we had Tamika come in and present at the beginning of the meetings, kind of give us a little update of why we're doing what we're doing. And with all the collective knowledge that we have, I think it would be really good to open up our meetings with even just a opportunity for one of us out of the group to present in regards to what we're doing in transportation or in regards to some kind of movement or take home or evaluation or presentation in regards to what we're doing. So for example, we're working with UC Berkeley in transportation, and we're creating an e-zine, and some of the focus groups are based on transportation and the barriers to transportation. I would love to be able to present, and I know that there's others, there are others that have just as great work that they're doing in their own spaces that would be kind of a window of looking into the knowledge or the wisdom that we already have existing on our table.
Yeah, great recommendation. Thank you, Martha. Almost like a committee member spotlight to share about
I just think that what we're doing is so important. And like I sit here sometimes and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we could apply for that. Or, and then I think, okay, well, if that were to happen, okay, I'm going to have to step back and say, I recuse myself from that particular part or whatnot, because we applied, or how does that work or whatnot. But in that same understanding, there's a lot of work that we're doing in regards to some of these opportunities of engagement, outreach and things. And if we were to, if someone were to say kind of like peer-to-peer learning, if there's a question about some type of a practice then maybe one of us could present on that. And that would also broaden our outreach as well, because those folks that are listening to that session might say, oh, I learned this at that meeting. They actually talked about this, or there was a really interesting topic that was brought up in the discussion about transportation and how safety is an issue, or how some folks are dealing with some of those issues. You know, anything related to what we're doing that would just broaden and heighten one's knowledge, whether it's peer or out there in the public. I think it's a good opportunity for us to show, you know, that opportunity to offering equity to all to learn.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martha. Randy, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to share some exciting news from San Diego and City Heights in particular. Over the last year and a half, we've been working with a filmmaker to produce a documentary that's looked at the last 10 years of the work of City Heights CDC and community leaders in City Heights. And we just released it a few weeks ago. It's called People, Power, Mobility. And it focuses on the City Heights Built Environment Team, which is a resident group that has led a lot of regional transportation justice campaigns and local campaigns as well. And I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat, but it's 8 minutes long, and yeah, feel free to give it a watch. Love to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Randy. Any other committee announcements? Alex, go ahead.
I don't have an announcement, but more as like a question. I realize that we're already past time and I do apologize, but is there any way we as a committee can act on the fiscal cliff that's approaching transit? I know we haven't really set up a structure on how to do things, but since we are advising 3 statewide agencies, the fiscal cliff is approaching. Like, is there anything that we can do? I know it's super short minute turnaround, but I wanted to ask.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Alex. Does anybody from our 3 agencies have any thoughts on that, or immediate opportunities where the committee could weigh in on that? And if not now, we could definitely take this back and try and get you all an answer as soon as possible.
Well, this is Tanisha. I'm not sure if Mark is on the line. I know that's something that CalSTA is working on in negotiations on the budget side of the house, but it is definitely something, Alex, that we can take your concerns, understand them, and then try to figure out if there is something we can or cannot do depending on kind of what you're looking at. So maybe we can follow up with you just to better understand what you're looking for and then try to figure out a plan of action.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Tanisha.
Would it be proper for us to draft a resolution as a committee? And that's the dilemma, is that as a committee, we can't talk outside this meeting. So, but it would be nice to have a way to have a discussion about how we want to support transit. And if it means like having another meeting between now and the end of the budget negotiations, then maybe that's how.
Well, I think this is Tanisha again, sorry. One of the things that I want to make sure we consider as we're talking about how we solve the transit fiscal cliff is that there is a short-term issue and there is a long-term issue, and the issue is large and different across all of our transit operators. And so I want to better understand what Alex you're saying, what William you're saying, so that we're meeting the needs of the committee and providing useful and helpful input into that process based on the committee's thoughts. I hear you, William, that it's challenging for committee members to talk to each other. There may be ways within Bagley-Keene that we can communicate not across the committee members talking to each other, but soliciting feedback from members. But it really depends on what we want to do, how quickly we want to do it, because the budget has to be resolved by June 15th. But that doesn't mean that we don't have an opportunity to talk about the longer term solution as well, because a longer term solution is needed in addition to kind of the short term solution that is being discussed within the budget itself right now.
I trust you will lead us in the right direction in regards to how to provide input. And I'll be patiently waiting. And I appreciate Alex for bringing it up.
I will try my best, is what I'm going to say.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you both. Martha, is that an old hand or did you have another comment or question? Might be an old hand, or you're muted if in case you were. Okay. Alex, is that an old hand or did you have an additional comment or question?
Apologies, old hand.
No worries. Thank you. Okay, I recognize we are definitely over time. Folks, I appreciate your patience and sticking through. Any last updates, comments, or questions before I move us into closing out with recapping this meeting and then adjourning?
This is Amber Novi. I actually have to go because I have to go pick up my kids from daycare. So I apologize, but
no
thank
need
you
to
very
apologize.
much. Okay.
Thank you, Amber. Okay. All right, so in the interest of time, we would normally do a more detailed report back of what we've heard from today's meeting. I just want to highlight a few very key points that I think that we have taken detailed notes, and our staff will compile these notes for the committee's benefit, and we'll be happy to share those out. I think some of the most important things that we heard today was really around clarifying, the role of the committee and the power that they have. So this clarity and the calendar of like interagency opportunities to really collaborate with us, and with understanding what those opportunities are and the power that the committee holds, that can then help inform the charter and the structure that the agency pursues. And then from that, looking to clarify, scheduling and involvement, and then essentially the purpose and outcomes from those engagement opportunities. And then I know that we have some action items around ways in which the committee members can interface with our agencies. We'll be sending out additional details about those opportunities. And if anybody today didn't have a chance to self-select and opt into one of those subcommittees, you'll still have an opportunity to do so. We also welcome ongoing feedback and questions from the committee outside of this meeting if something comes up after today. Okay. With that, I will make an announcement that our next meeting is scheduled. It will be held in person on September 26th from 1 to 4 p.m. And virtual options will also be made available, but we will need to have a quorum of in-person committee members in order to hold that meeting. So you can expect to hear more from us on that. And as of right now, before a charter is adopted, the default quorum is 8 people, which is half plus 1 of the committee membership. Okay, let me pause. Is there any public comment on this item?
Thank you, Carolyn. We've not received any public comment for this item.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Okay, hearing none. I just want to express my genuine appreciation for all of you for participating today. I think this has been an incredibly productive meeting. We will send out follow-up, so more details to come, and we look forward to being in touch with all of you. So with that, I will adjourn our meeting at 4:23 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you to all the
everyone.
CDC, Commission, Caltrans.
Thank you.
Staff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, thanks.